At this time, we're going to have greetings from several of the staff members from the Equal Justice Initiative that are with us today. And I must say that it has been a pleasure working with these three young ladies around this project for the last 2.5 years. And I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fox. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kiana. I'm a Justice Fellow at the Equal Justice Initiative, and I, along with my colleagues, Sion and Kayla, are really pleased to be here with you all today to join you in dedicating these three very important and permanent educational tools in the community. The Equal Justice Initiative is a human rights organization dedicated to ending mass incarceration and challenging racial and economic injustice in our society. We were originally founded in 1989 when our executive director, Attorney Brian Stevenson, came to Montgomery, Alabama, where we're based, to defend people on Alabama's death row. We're an anti-death penalty organization. We believe that capital punishment should not exist, especially given the racially discriminatory ways in which it has been administered, both historically and today. We also believe that everybody is more than the worst thing that they've ever done. And so we continue that work as an anti-death penalty organization, but we've also expanded our work to include challenging the excessive punishment of children, also challenging the inhumane and unconstitutional prison conditions throughout the state of Alabama, and providing reentry services for our clients so that they can have a meaningful life after incarceration. So after about 20 years of doing this work, we realized that in order to effectively address the racial and economic injustices we're seeing with our clients and within the context of the criminal legal system, that we were actually going to have to take a step back and do a deeper dive into our nation's history of racial injustice, because we believe the challenges that we're seeing in the criminal legal system are deeply rooted in this history. And so in 2008, we started a public history initiative. We began doing a lot of research into our nation's history, starting with Montgomery and the role that Montgomery played in the domestic slave trade, and then expanding that to a national scale. And then in 2018, we actually established two very important cultural sites, including the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which Dr. Simmons just mentioned. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice stands in memory of the over 4,400 victims, Black victims of racial terror lynching between the end of Reconstruction in 1877 and 1950. And the Legacy Museum traces the history of enslavement all the way to present-day mass incarceration. So I'm going to hand it over to Kayla to talk a little bit more about this history.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kayla Vincent, and I'm a staff attorney at the Equal Justice Initiative. And I just want to talk a little bit more about what my colleague Kiana was just saying about the fact that EJI didn't come to this work as public historians, but rather as legal advocates who had already spent 2 decades trying to help courts and other actors in the criminal justice system understand how the outcomes that our clients were facing were really about that race and wealth were really impacting those outcomes. And it just became clear to us that part of the problem was that as a nation, people didn't know this history, and people were too comfortable with the really intolerable and inhumane things that our clients face on a daily basis. And so that is what pushed us to want to invite people to join us on this journey of understanding the history of racial injustice in this country, of understanding that at EJI we believe that slavery never ended, it simply evolved, and that one of the systems that it evolved into was the era of racial terror lynching, which is a time period where this myth of Black dangerousness, this idea that a racial democracy was impossible in the United States, the foundational commitment to white supremacy and racial hierarchy continued when it didn't have to. And that continuance led to, between 1865 and 1877, the lynchings of at least 2,000 Black people in an era where the deaths of Black people were so poorly documented. There are very likely many more who we do not know. And then ushered in an era of racial terror lynching where at least 4,500 Black people lost their lives, including Mr. Humphreys, Mr. Rankin, and Mr. Brackett. And we know that this myth of Black dangerousness was invoked in order to justify brutal acts of white domination. It was never about dangerousness. It was about white supremacy. And our executive director often talks about the death penalty as a stepchild of lynching because of the relationships between the two, because of the fact that some of the states with the highest rates of lynching during the lynching era today have the highest rates of death penalty sentences. And so when we think about what it means to fully memorialize these three men today and to honor the conditions of life that they endured, that means we have to also have a commitment to ending the era of mass incarceration. Because today in the state of North Carolina, it is still possible for a person to be sentenced to death. It is possible for a child as young as 6 to enter the criminal justice system. And as a nation, we have our prison population has grown from 1972, it was about 200,000 people. Today, it is 2.3 million. If you include people who are on probation and parole, that number exceeds 7 million. This is not about public safety. It is about a myth of Black dangerousness that turned into a law and order politics that today is preventing us from being safer. So for people who wonder and would like to believe that had they been alive during the era of racial terror lynching, that they would have been insisting that it end, that they would have been with Ida B. Wells Barnett, they would have been with the NAACP and insisting that this era end, you don't have to wonder what you would have done if you lived during an era of a massive racial injustice, because you currently live in an era of massive racial injustice. So the answer to that question is, what are you doing today? And we believe that this project that Sian is going to talk about in a moment is a really important step to really beginning that process of repair in our country. So we're very grateful to you all for joining us today, for joining a national conversation and insisting that Asheville and Buncombe County can be a different place.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm Sian Blackwell, and I'm a Justice Fellow at the Equal Justice Initiative. I just thank my colleague, Kayla, for really giving you all that invitation to join this work and to really come and join us in this work of fighting racial injustice in this era. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Community Remembrance Project, which you are here today for, in Buncombe County, and how this work has grown nationally from the Equal Justice Initiative. So it's one of our core beliefs that you have to be proximate to this work. You have to be proximate to the issues of racial injustice and inequality in order to make real change. And we believe that when we were doing this research and we were documenting over the 6,500 victims of racial terror lynching, we realized that this history was local. It was happening in individual communities, and people weren't talking about it. They were distancing themselves from it. And we realized that this is something that is crucial for communities individually to recognize. Just right here in Buncombe County, you have 3 documented victims. And we really appreciate the work that Dr. Fox and Dr. Simmons and everyone on the Buncombe Community Remembrance Project has done thus far to recognize these victims. We have 3 projects: a soil collection project, the racial justice essay contest, and the historical marker ceremonies. And this community has already completed the soil collection project, as you see here, the 3 jars that were collected back in May. And we had a record number of students participate in the racial justice essay contest. And now for all of you being here today, it's so wonderful to see so many faces here to recognize these men, and I hope you go on the journey with us to unveil these markers. But I ask of you all to think about, where does it, as Kayla mentioned, where do you go next? If you have a neighbor, a family member, or a friend who's not here, mention these men's names by name to them. Ask them, what do they know these stories? Bring them to these markers. Make sure that they engage, because our community remembrance work is a long-term commitment. Even though this community has already finished the 3 projects, it doesn't end here. This work is never finished because we are currently in this era of racial injustice. We are in the era of mass incarceration. And so I just ask you all to really stay engaged, stay involved, and think about your community when we're doing this work. And come and visit us in Montgomery as well at the Legacy Museum from Enslavement to Mass Incarceration, and at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And I really just want to say thank you again for being here, and I hope that you really reflect on this history as we say these men's names today and we go to these markers. So thank you all again for being here.